Start again now.
No, that should be all right. Yeah. So, if you want to talk about what sort of roles you had when you were,
So do you want to start from scratch?
yeah, go on then. If that's
Right,
all
let's start from beginning.
Yeah, sure.
I'm Steve Wyatt. I've worked at a coal mine called Dodworth Colliery. I was the sixth generation of my family to work in various coal mines in and around Barnsley. My grandfather worked at Barnsley Main, which is this colliery that you can see the upcast shaft of the old Barnsley Main colliery. The Oates Colliery cupola shaft is just over on that hillside on one of those concrete markers over there if you want to have a look at that. And that was a cupola shaft which ventilated the colliery. They had a fire underground to draw air down the two downcast shafts, which is situated in the industrial estate now, which is on the railway side, where the public footpath is that you can walk up and down today. The shaft is not visible today, but there's a shaft in that location for the old Barnsley Main colliery that's visible there today. Mining, it's very hard work. You do lots of jobs. When I started, I was 15-year-old, and initially at that time the law prohibited anybody going underground till you were 16 years of age. So you did various jobs on the colliery surface: stores, stockyard, coal preparation plant. That were on the coal mining apprentice side. If you were a craft apprentice, either an electrician, you went into the electric shop, or if you were a fitter, you went into a fitting shop on surface. Then when you were 16, you were asked if you wanted to go and do your underground training. So you then came to Barnsley Main on that side, where the training centre is still standing today. So you'd make your own way to Barnsley Main, and then you go to the training centre and they would bus you from here to Grindthorpe Colliery, where you started to do your underground training. And when you went to Grindthorpe Colliery, you got changed in their baths, used their facilities, you went underground and you went down what they call the coping winder into the park gate seam. When you got off at the pit bottom, you turned right and went up into the old Barnsley bed, and that's where you did your underground training for a various amount of weeks on how to lash tubs on steel ropes, moving ropes, how to do all aspects of safety with coupling and uncoupling of tubs and trams. And then when you came back to your respective colliery. Depending on your size at that time, if you were a big lad, you were put at pit bottom. There was lots of work to do at pit bottom. If you're only a little small lad, you were put at workings. And my first job, they sent me with a guy called Ron Beverley, and he was a road ligger, they called him. In actual fact, his correct title is they laid rails for rolling stock to transport materials underground on tubs and trams. I worked with him for a small period, and he had an accident on his motorbike. Somebody in the car ran into him and broke his leg. So then they put me with another gentleman called Tommy Underwood, and he was a road ligger, but he was out low side at Colliery, at Dodworth Colliery with Moorseam. And when I worked with him, everybody called him Vince, and I thought his name was Vince, until one day this old collie was speaking to him and says, "All right, Tom, I'll see you, goodbye." And I looked at him, I thought, they don't call him Tom. I said, "Why did he call you Tom when your name's Vince?" He says, "No, my right name's Tom. Vince is my nickname." And I says, "Well, how did you get that name to him?" And he says, "When I was 13, I was tramming for my father at Rob Roy Colliery." He says, "And this collier was talking to my dad, and he says, 'Oh, is this lad?' He says, 'He's my lad.' He says, 'Well, what's I call him?' He says, 'Well, he's there, ask him.' He said, 'I was right shy, I was only 13. He said, 'I had a pit pony with me. And this collier asked me my name twice and I won't tell him.' So he says, 'I'm going to call the after pit pony,' because they all had, on the harness of the horse, on the head harnesses, they had a name on them. And they were made of leather, and this name on this horse was Vincent. So they called him Vinny all his working life. Everybody knew him as Vinny Underwood, but his right name was Tom. So I worked with him for a period. And then I went on to haulage, transporting materials up and down with older guys, all part of your training. Then I went methane boring, which was drilling for gas, and we used to drill out at Silkston seam, down into Wimmoor seam to degas 2 seams at the same time, a methane gas. Then I went on to coal face and did my coal face training, and then obviously when you do so many weeks coal face training, then you pass out, and then you go on we had a rota system at Dodworth Colliery with front face rota, i.e. that means anybody that worked in the main gate corner, tailgate corner, or in drawing off, which is called chocks, that was front face rota. There was ripping rota for rippers, and then obviously when it come to your turn on rota, you get allocated a job on a coal face. So first coal face that I worked on were 85s, and then after that it were 86s, and then they stopped 86s till they had a coal face at Redbrook end to go over the top, and then after it had gone over the top and it had settled, they restarted 86 back up, and I went back into the same job. And that's how that system used to work. But you had lots of people worked at the colliery underground. There were colliers, there were out by workers, there were heading men or development men, you'd stone dust men, you'd road liggers, you'd belt men, you'd pump men, everybody you could think on all worked at the underground at the pit. But it was a male orientated world. No women, no girls underground, because obviously they were banned after the 1838 Husky disaster, and the Royal Commission for Mines Act of 1842 banned women and girls from going underground and boys under 10, and that's why you get a lot of people that we leave school at 10-year-old. When the Education Act comes in, the 10-year-old, that's why you get a lot of lads in a lot of explosions killed in the 10-year-old. And that's the reason why, because school leaving age, Education Act was 10-year-old, then it went to 12, 14, 15, whatever it is today, and that was through to Education Act. But mining, it's an interesting game, and you have lots of good mates and with lots of comrades, and everybody looks after everybody, and it takes all types to work in a pit. Obviously you'll be amazed, it's unbelievable. But realistically, it's quite a few years since I worked in industry, and if the open pit's back up, would I go back? Yeah, if I were fit enough and young enough, I'd go back tomorrow. It was a fantastic environment to be in, because you work with blokes that were flying pigeons and gardeners and these that used to do all types of things, and you learnt a lot of things. It was a big education working at a colliery, I can tell you now. I learnt more when I worked at pit than I ever did at school. Because I mean, like when you went to school, they used to learn your technical drawing. Well, technical drawing's alright if you want to be a designer, architect, or out like that. I could never see sense of that realistically, but it's just that system was at the time. Yeah, but it was good, very good. But as relating back to Oaks disaster, the Oaks disaster it was a terrible event that occurred in 1866, but prior to that there were explosions at Oaks in 1845, and then one in 1847, and then there was a big explosion in 1866 which killed 361 men and boys, which were quite a devastating event at that time. I should imagine then at that time, it was the biggest explosion in England. We're not talking Scotland or Wales, but in England, and it was the biggest explosion, and it obviously imploded drastically in a lot of families. I mean, there were some families that lost quite a numerous amount of people. They lost sons, husbands, uncles. They lost a lot of people. It caused them major devastation. And initially, after all the survivors that they actually got out alive out at Oaks Colliery, there were only 6 survivors. And one of them 6 survivors was a lad called William Henry Hart. And he was a lad. And when he was working at Pit Bottom area, and he worked with a donkey. You might think, donkeys, they didn't have donkeys in that pit. Yeah, they had donkeys in that pit at that time. They didn't own air pit ponies. And he had his arm round neck at donkey, and he was in a niche at Pit Bottom area. And obviously the explosion is a catastrophic thing. It's like you're in an enclosed area, and when it explodes, there's no way you can get out of it. It's that fast. It's faster than putting a light switch on an explosion. But it don't get you when it goes one way, it comes back again and comes back all the way and gets you again. And because he were in this niche and the donkey took the full extremity of the explosion, he survived. When the oaks pit closed and they filled the shafts in, that couple of shafts were filled in, and the number 1 and 2 shafts were filled in, to fill them in because of the fire underground. The guy that went down and got him out at pit was a guy called Sugden, and he got killed, unfortunately, in the second explosion. When they retrieved his body, and Parkin Jeffcott and others that were in Tomlinson's Boxhole, which were at pit bottom area, they actually walked from Barnsley to Dodworth and buried him in Dodworth churchyard. And William Henry Hart's only a lad at this time, and he cried bitterly at graveside. William Henry Hart, later then in 1867 period, went back to Oaks Colliery, but he lost the use of his arm, so his nickname became Touch. That was his nickname. So they gave him a job that was suitable to requirements because of his disablement. And day lads worked longer than colliers. But what they used to do, they used to have boxes down pit, made like a coffin, but rough made, with no lid on, and just 4 handles. And obviously colliers had gone home this day, and next shift had come on, next set of colliers had come on to work into the working area, and they'd only got oil lamps, which is only like 2 kilowatt power. And he thought, well, I'll get laid down in one of these boxes and get a rest. And they shone this light and saw him, thought it was a body, in this coffin. So they picked these 4 handles up and started walking to the pit bottom area. And as they're walking down to the pit bottom, bear in mind they're in workings, and he's listening to them talking about the pigeon flying and fishing and all the coating and with there being boats in, and talking about football, they're talking about everyday things in general. And he sat up in this box and asked him time of day, and they dropped him and they run, and every time he shouted hey, hey, they run faster. So they must have thought they picked a guy up and he come alive as a ghost, and that was it tittled him for years and years and years, you see. When he died, he's buried in Unley Lane, Overspill Cemetery, and on his gravestone it says the last survivor of the Great Oaks explosion, and he died in 1914. Now there were also another guy that's buried near him, and they call him John Riley. And John Riley was a rescue volunteer, but he initially, when he came to Barnsley, John Riley, he could only speak Gaelic Welsh. He come from North Wales, he got a job at Oaks, he knew Oaks underground, and then he left Oaks Pit before the explosion, and he went to work at Mount Osborne Colliery, which were on Pontefract Road. He left there, and then obviously he was told that the Oaks had fired, so because he knew underground workings, he volunteered as a rescue volunteer to underground to see how they could get out alive. When he was with a team of rescue volunteers, and bear in mind they only got oil lamps with them, it's only 2 kilowatt power like I've just told you before, they went round the corner, and between 2 tubs there's a little lad stood between 2 tubs, and he's got a flat cap on, he's stood up, his eyes is open, he's got his oil lamp in one hand and his hand on tub between tubs, and there's 2 white lines down here like that. And John Riley went up to him and put his hand on his shoulder, and he says, "Hey, all right, lad," and he were dead. He died of carbon monoxide poisoning, that little lad. So that must have affected them really severely. And then later on, John Riley had a shop on Oaks Lane. It was a provision shop. In 1901 he's got a shop, his left pit he's got a shop. And he must have made a bob or two because he built a street of houses in off Oaks Lane called Conway Street, and they call it Conway Street today, and he built them. When he died, when he was 90 in 1939, he's buried in the same cemetery as William Henry Hart. He's buried in the same cemetery, and you can spit from one grave to the other. And that's really a real coincidence, isn't it? But like I say, I mean, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I wish you well.
Thank you.
I don't know. The Oaks Colliery explosion. Men and boys rescued by volunteers. From the first explosion, only 20 came out of the pit alive, and only 6 lived. And the 6 lived are as follows: Henry Marshall, aged 14, and he was killed aged 18 in a rowfall at Agnes Main Colliery, and he was buried in Barnsley Cemetery in 1870. There was another guy called George Tasker, aged 38. He was the cupola tenter, which he mended fire at the bottom of that cupola shaft, that oak shaft there, that was in that corner. On the surface, he would not let go of his deck cat, and he died in October 1873, aged 45. Smith Bates, a collier aged 33 who worked with his brother Philip, left his workplace underground to attend a family funeral, and he died in August 1884, aged 51, and he was buried at Edgerton Cemetery in Huddersfield. William Ewell, aged 40, lampman. The lamp pole was underground in the pit bottom between the 2 shafts, and he died in May 1887, aged 61, burial Ardsley Churchyard. Robert Thompson, a collier, aged 30, he was in a state of paralysis for 40 weeks. When he got fairly better, he had to learn to walk again. He was in ill health all his life, and then the management of Montbretton Colliery were very sympathetic to him and employed him on light duties. He died May 1907, aged 71, and his burial's in Montbretton Cemetery. William Henry Hart, aged 10, a donkey driver, was around the pit bottom at the time of the disaster, and his workmates called him Touch. He died in May 1914, aged 59, and is buried at Ardsley Cemetery, Unley Lane, which is B6100 Road. The inscription on his gravestone reads, "The last survivor of the Great Oaks Explosion, 1866. Samuel Brown, aged 39, he worked at Smithy Bridge Colliery, was one of the 198 rescue volunteers, and he survived the second and third explosion. Mr. John Edward Mamet and Thomas William Embleton Jr., mining engineers, went down the wreck shaft on an errand of rescue and found Samuel Brown alive. Samuel Brown died aged 71, and he was buried in Barnsley Cemetery, October 1899. I've also got a bit more information, and I'm sorry for reading it, not looking at the camera at this point in time, but I've got a bit more information about a lad that worked at Oaks Pit, and they call him George Clapham. And he worked at lamp room, which were underground between 2 shafts, as just stated. And initially he worked on night shift. He's got out at pit at 5 o'clock at morning, and he's walked to back Queen Street, and he's got his brother out of bed and bade him goodbye, and then he went to bed. Then later on he'd learnt in that day that the Oaks Colliery had fired, and he went back as a rescue volunteer, but he didn't go underground to rescue. He cleaned all the lamps on the surface, oil lamps on the surface, which they'd been obtained from Darfield Main Colliery. And every time the rescue men went down and came out, he asked them if they'd been on a place called Payman's Level, because Payman's Level is a place where his brother worked. But unfortunately, it was that devastated that they couldn't get on Payman's Level, because underground at one time, at this period of time, they used to place names like Billywood's Ginny, Payman's Level, and different names underground at that time. And he never saw his brother, this guy called George Clapham, from that day to this. But like I say, I mean, it implodes drastically on a lot of people. I've also got a piece here about a lady, and you might think that this is a bit factual in a roundabout way, and this is in 1901, and this is a lady that's passed away. And a sad case has been sent from Ardsley by Mr. John Broadhead that of Mrs. Ann Bennett, aged 70, who assisted in laying out the dead and attending to the wounded in doing this merciful work. Her system was impregnated with putrid matter, which has affected her health ever since over the years. And I can believe that, because when I first read this about this lady, I thought, well, now it's impossible that. But then when I went to the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, and when you go to that enactment and talk to different people, there were a British officer mounted on a horse, and a cannonball just chopped the horse's head off. And when the horse fell over, his leg were under the horse, he couldn't get up. He couldn't get the horse off him because of weight, but the blood off the horse soaked into his tunic and his leggings. And initially, because then to change the clothes, he couldn't get changed, so the blood off the horse actually percolated into his system, and he were in health when he died. It said he were in ill health all this time after that incident at Battle of Waterloo. So this in this period about this lady from Barnsley is quite true, and like I said, it's just how it is, unfortunately, at that time. And I'd like to finish on that note.